How do you manage a temper tantrum?
Welcome to Parenting Matters Now, a source of parenting advice a few minutes at a time.
Hi, this is Dr. Roger Smith with Parenting Matters Now. I think we have all seen a temper tantrum, but to be clear, we're talking about when a child has a complete emotional meltdown and are seeking to control their situation with emotion, and are loud, crying, any number of antics, but we all identify what a temper tantrum looks like in our families and how do we deal with them. There are a couple of things for I would advise you to consider whenever you look at a temper tantrum. The child is trying to say in some way, I want you to do something different. Quite often it is triggered by the denial of something that they've asked for or something. They've lost their turn. Someone has taken their toy. Any number of things where a child feels a loss and emotion comes welling up in them. And I would encourage you to first stop and look at the situation independent of your own emotional reaction to a child who is having a temper tantrum. And sometimes we are the person at fault. So I'm going to start there, but I want to get to dealing with the temper tantrum. But first, evaluate, have you in some way handled a response in a mean or unkind way that has incited the emotion? So sometimes we can say no kindly, and other times we can say no in a very harsh way. And in some way, our emotion is triggering an emotion in our child. So I would encourage you to evaluate first, is there something you could have done differently? I'm not saying avoid a conflict. I'm saying you can say no or you can deny whatever the child is asking for in a nice way, or you can preempt their emotional response in some way by saying, honey, I know you want this and I would want it too, or I want that for you, but they can't happen today. And let's look at let's find a time when you can watch that show, have that treat, whatever it is, but it's not today. It can't happen today. Now, I'm not saying that's going to uh, prevent a temper tantrum, but it has the possibility of that. And it is a kind way of addressing something where they cannot have their desire. So first, evaluate your own self. Could you have done things differently that would not have triggered their response? But also, if you saw a conflict coming and you knew that it was going to involve their sense of loss and their emotional response, sometimes you can anticipate that and help them to anticipate going, oh, I don't believe I think someone else has already chosen the color cup that you want. Or I think someone else already has that toy. Let's think about what we want if we can't get that one. And so you can, in a way, kind of train their thinking before you realize, before they realize they're not going to get their way. So there are some things to prevent temper tantrums. So now let's deal with the ones that are happening. When a child is having a throwdown, a emotional meltdown, they are simply trying to, well, let me back up and say, they are in an age usually whenever their emotions are very difficult for them to control. They don't have the experience of saying, okay, I'm disappointed, but I can think about the future. I can think about the other alternatives. They are usually at an age or a stage where they're locked in on one option, and that one option is, I don't get what I want. And so sometimes we want them to control their emotions as if they are 5 or 6 years older. And then we begin matching our emotions, their emotion, and we go head to head. And so those scenarios are not very helpful. if we're going to control it with emotion, we're basically training them to use their emotion to control their environment. When they're in a meltdown, just understand that telling them to stop is not actually going to be helpful. Yes, you can use those words, that's not acceptable behavior. Sometimes their attempts to use emotion, if we respond with emotion, they're getting what they're asking for. They're asking for us to get involved. Temper tantrums sometimes needs to be ignored. Their use of emotion does not result in a response on your part. It basically tells them that that's not working. They need to try something else. And they can eventually get that message, but just know that at first, a child that is having poor emotional control, they don't get the message. It comes through very poorly to them. And so and two, they're not at the stage where they can talk themselves out of that emotion. Sometimes the child just needs to cry it out. And so in that scenario, take the child to a different place away from everyone else so that everybody else is not miserable. Take them to a room, take them to the bathroom, take them somewhere private where they can have their fit, they can bang their head, they can do whatever. A child usually, in a very rare instance, will hurt themselves, but a child usually will not injure themselves. If they bang their head against the wall or on the floor, they are not going to injure themselves. Our job is to not match their emotion with our emotion, but to look for ways for them to let their emotion run its course. And then whenever you're not in the heat of the battle, that's when to train them, to talk to them and go, and when you don't get what you want, here are some ways that we as a family respond to that. We can negotiate. We can ask for another option. You've come up with some solutions to say what they can do, but it's not, whenever they're in a temper tantrum, they are not listening. They cannot hear you because their emotion is running wild. Our job is to be in control of our own emotion. Now, sometimes temper tantrums need punishment. Most of the time, they need to be ignored, or they need to be trained, or they need to be isolated, and so that they do not get rewarded for having a temper tantrum. Well, that's not all there is to know about temper tantrums, but that's a start. This is Dr. Roger Smith with Parenting Matters Now.
Subscribe to Parenting Matters Now for more advice, or go to rogersmithmd.com to search for more topics. See you next time.